Today, we discuss the first big idea of the class, epistemic dependence. As a reminder, epistemic dependence is basically the idea that we are often reliant on testimony to learn and discover new things. So in this video, we will unpack exactly what epistemic dependence means. Now, before I go into the details, I just want you to do a short exercise together with me. I want you to make a short mental list of 5 things that you know or believe. Now, you might ask what the difference between knowledge and belief is, but let's put that aside for now and assume that they are the same thing, right? Because often they go hand in hand. So for example, I know that Singapore gained independence in August 9, 1965. I also happen to believe that this fact is true. So you don't have to think hard about these 5 beliefs. Just make a list of the beliefs off the top of your head, and if you need to pause the video or if you have the 5 beliefs already, continue. Okay, so now you have your list. So for each of these beliefs, I just want you to do a quick check on their provenance or their source. So for those of you who did history in maybe A levels, right, or even secondary school, you might have discussed this idea of provenance, right? There it is, the idea of where did this particular belief, what is its source, right? So in the example that I gave you, right, I learned that Singapore gained independence on August 9th, 1965 because a school teacher told me, right? I believe that the bookstore in Newtown is open at 10 a.m. because someone, a student in Newtown, gave me that information. I also believe that Paris is the capital of France because someone told me, although through a different medium, they wrote it in a book. So how many of your beliefs come from someone informing you about something, informing you about the world, as it were, or even about someone else, states, or things that you didn't previously know? So I think it's safe to say that most of us, at least, have one belief on the list that was derived from someone telling us something. Typically through conversation, although the medium here can take many different forms, such as someone, a newscaster, informing us about current events, right? When we watch the news, or when we watch YouTube and they relay certain kinds of information, or an anthropologist reporting about a society in a book, or a historian writing about a certain point of time by collating information from various sources. So this is generally what philosophers term testimony. Testimony-based beliefs in this specific context refer to beliefs we acquire when we depend, at least in part, on the thought processes of our informant and other features of the social environment. And informants here refer simply to someone who literally is informing us, giving us information about the world. What time the bookstore is open, where is the bookstore, where is the nearest cafe, so on and so forth. Now, some of you might be confused because the way that testimony is used here, the word, is different from our ordinary understanding of testimony, which we tend to associate with formal testimony, right? Such as legal testimony. Now, the way that philosophers use the term testimony is a bit different, right? They use it as a kind of specialized technical term to show how we are often dependent upon others and features of the social environment in forming, sustaining, and maintaining our beliefs about the world and about each other and so on. That is, testimony shows us that we are inevitably dependent upon others to learn and discover things about the world around us and also the people around us, right? That is kind of like they are part of the world, right? Although they are mental states sometimes, right? that's a question, right? But we can find out about how someone is feeling also from someone else, and also from them directly reporting to us, because we don't have direct access to those kinds of facts. But in general, the basic idea is this. In other words, we are epistemically dependent upon others. Now, this is a very abstract idea, right? And I think that, again, right, as I said in the very first video, it sounds familiar to some and strange to others. So let's try to make what is a pretty abstract idea a bit more concrete. So let's go through some examples. Now imagine the following conversation between Alicia and Budi. And Cheng, so Alicia says this: Cheng tested negative for COVID-19 yesterday. That's good news. And Budi says, how do you know? Alicia says, he told me. So here we have a paradigmatic example of testimony-based belief. Alicia comes to acquire the belief that Cheng doesn't have COVID-19 because he relayed this information to her. And she then passes this information down to Budi. This kind of information transmission is very common, right? This is something which if you reflect for a second, you see is commonplace throughout all of our lives, and you probably already experienced this kind of information relay a few times at least today, right? And it's part and parcel of our everyday lives. I want you to sort of just take a millisecond to imagine a world where we cannot relay information in this way. What would it look like? And I think the answer would be that it would be significantly impoverished in terms of our ability to navigate the physical environment and especially the social environment, because we will lack a lot of information about one another and so on. So here is another example to illustrate the pervasiveness of testimony-based beliefs. So imagine the following conversation between Kishan and Eddie. Kishan says, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has just requested that the President dissolve Parliament and called for elections. And Eddie says, again, how do you know? Kishan says, I just read an article on Today online. So here again, Kishan forms a belief about the world through relying on an informant, a reporter from Today. He then relays this information to Eddie. This kind of transmission of information is very useful, right? We rely on the internet and other forms of medium to inform us, right? Which is also why fake news and disinformation through these very forms of communication are of such great concern for us, right? So already implicitly, as I've already sort of implied, testimony can help us to spread information very well, but it can also spread misinformation through the very same means. And we will look at this kind of tension, which is, if you paid attention to the podcast that I asked you to listen to, sort of already encloses this idea. Now, so far the examples we've discussed are mostly factual beliefs, facts about the world, or what people did, right? But we can also gain very valuable practical beliefs, right? That is knowing how to do things through testimony. In fact, it seems that very often we gain practical knowledge through testimony, with someone providing us with information about how to do something, or guiding us along as we try something out, right? So imagine the first time you were learning how to ride a bike, right? Probably someone there, right? So either a parent, a guardian, a friend, a cousin, so on and so forth, was guiding you with telling you, with providing you with information about how to ride a bike. Another question you might have, right? So maybe now you're trying to be more independent at home in lockdown, or you're going to go to Silliman College, and then you ask someone, okay, it's time for me to try to learn how to cook something. So suppose you ask someone, how did you learn how to fry eggs? Can you teach me? And I would say, okay. So that was a demonstration of how testimony can at times provide you with practical knowledge, right? Assuming that my transmission of that practical knowledge was effective to you, which I hope it was. But I think the examples of suffice, right? You have a sort of quite long catalogue of examples, and I could go on and on and on. But we have places to be and things to do. Well, maybe not really these days in a time of where mobility is quite restricted. But I hope you get the point by now. We rely on others for information, and epistemic dependence is an inherent feature of our lives. Right? Rely on others for information for many, if not the bulk, of our beliefs, as Kaylin O'Connor mentioned in the Hidden Brain podcast. And one of the things that we also do is that we can rely on testimony for further information, right? Given other ways of knowing about the world, right? So for example, right, one of the classic ways of knowing about the world yourself is through observation, right? Looking around the world, right? So imagine now, we observe John walking to the canteen. Then we want to know, okay, I can see John is walking to the canteen, but I don't know why is he going to the canteen. So we can ask Jay, right? And Jay can inform us that, oh, John is going to meet a friend at the canteen. So testimony can lead us to further beliefs based on what we can call our first-hand ways of gaining knowledge, right? First-hand, like memory, perception, right? Seeing, or inference, logical inference, right? So we will talk more about what this means in class. So the basic point that I really want to drive through here is that inquiry, right, from the sort of basic building blocks of knowledge, right, the basic things we know about the world already, is deeply social. And as I mentioned, the classroom is also a great illustration of this point, right? Part of the educator's job is to provide you with some information through testimony, to relate to you, oh, this thinker thinks this person said this, or this experiment did this, blah, blah, blah. But of course, eventually, the goal is to allow you to evaluate this information yourself, right? Through your own, to provide you with the skills to evaluate what we say, and also to provide you with skills so that you can go on to evaluate other pieces of information, other sources of information, and so on and so forth. But notice that this process of evaluation requires you to at least form some of your beliefs through testimony, right? It sort of requires you to sort of take on certain starting points, and we provide a lot of those starting points through testimony. Another important point that I want to note is that we often rely on testimony not only because it's necessary, right? So say for example, because we have no choice but to rely on historical records, or rely on someone who was at an event which we couldn't witness ourselves. Oftentimes, we rely on testimony not only because it's necessary, but because it is much more efficient and useful to rely on someone who is more reliable and can provide us with information. And as we will see throughout the course of this module, even experts who cultivate significant expertise and evaluative skill often rely on testimony, right? And one of the reasons why this is the case is because of specialization, and also because having a division of labor between different groups is useful for making greater and more efficient advances in knowledge. So I hope that you sort of get the basic idea, which is that we are epistemically dependent upon one another to learn and discover new things about the world. I've gone on for about 15 minutes, right? And I've banged the drum for epistemic dependence loudly enough, I think. But you might ask, right? So what? Even if we are dependent upon other people, should we really trust testimony? Should we really be epistemically dependent? Let's find out in class on Wednesday. See you then.